Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Eighth Wall live learning session. This is our weekly series where we invite our developer community to come join us for an interactive session of tips and tricks related to web AR development using Eighth Wall. In these sessions, we're going to talk about what's new at Eighth Wall, things like recent announcements, if we have any newer updated features, updated or new sample projects, and so on. Then we're going to dive into a relevant topic or demo, followed by live Q&A. If you have questions as we go through the session today, please do use the Zoom Q&A window. We'll definitely get to all the questions, time permitting. This session will be recorded and it will be posted on YouTube as well as emailed to everyone who's registered. Before we jump into today's content, just a couple of quick intros. My name is Tony Tamarchio. I'm the Director of Technical Operations at Eighth Wall, and I'm joined once again by Rigel Benton. He's our lead product designer. So you've probably seen us or interacted with us through our developer Slack channel. If you're not already a member, please do sign up. Go to eighthwall.com/Slack. We are now just over 3,000 members in the Slack channel. It's a great place to interact with the developer community, ask questions, share what you've created. So between the two of us, Rigel and I have worked with thousands of web AR developers, and our goal is really to pass along tips and tricks that we've learned along the way. We definitely value our developer input. So if you have any feedback, questions, comments, issues, please do reach out to us at any time. In today's session, the topic of the day is custom domains. We're going to be talking about the Cloud Editor custom domain feature, and we'll go through kind of how that works and talk about that today. And with that, I'd like to start today's live learning session by turning things over to Rigel, who's going to give a quick update on some recent updates from the team.
Cool. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen.
Perfect.
Okay, so we've actually been quite busy in the background over the last few months working on improving our Cloud Editor experience. So if you've been using Cloud Editor, you may have noticed sort of small incremental improvements sort of as you develop over these last few months. And so I wanted to talk about a few of them because we haven't publicly highlighted, I don't believe any of these yet. So I want to start with sort of top down. So on the very top, we've got our source controls bar, right? Which handles all of the things that are most critical to landing changes to your project, to saving and building those changes, to then preview those changes with the QR code. Of course, creating new clients that you can, add features sort of separate from your main workspace. So we're familiar with this. Well, you may have noticed that just underneath this bar, we now have these status indicators that let you know important things like whether or not you're waiting for, changes to sync with your project. And if I had another member of my team who maybe had landed something that didn't have, that wouldn't cleanly sync. Let's say that there's a merge conflict. It will actually let you know that there's a merge conflict for you to resolve prior to you hitting the sync button. And so this is like super useful for just at a glance trying to understand, what you're going to do next. And you can put off that merge conflict until after you make your change and so forth. Underneath here, we've got this is brand new. A build indicator status. So now when you hit save and build, it's actually going to fill you in on everything that's going on every step of the way in the cloud to let you know when that build has either succeeded or it's failed, whether you have changes to build, whether it's waiting on changes to build, and so you can understand at any point in the process where you're at. And you'll notice that like whenever I hit this button and it did all those things, down here we've got these new icons. We call them the recency indicator. And this lets you know how recent this particular tab received a message, right? So the system tab is now where we contain both the build and repo messages. You can filter these by clicking through here. You can also clear them. But it's sort of a great way of looking and saying like, okay, if I hit save and build, is something happening without needing to actually access the tab to see if there's any movement. Also with inside the console here, we've got a number of different improvements. So one thing you may notice is we now have a clear on run toggle, and this is on by default. So every time you reload your device So I'm just going to go ahead and manually reload that on my phone. You'll notice it'll clear all of those messages, and it'll come back here, and so you're not overwhelmed, right? We also have stack traces now within the console, so you can expand messages that sort of route you back to where they initially started. So you're not left with like the end result of where that is coming from. So it becomes really more helpful for debugging. Let's see. You can also see what file it's coming from, the timestamp, of course. You can search filter. So so in here, right? Like I've made a console log within my tap place. And so as I begin to tap on my phone, you can't see what I'm doing on my phone, but I'm tapping. It's running this script, right? And then it's you can see here it has these collapsible messages now. So it's not going to say hello world. It's like in repeat. Instead, it's just going to keep incrementing that number, so it's more legible and you can see everything that's happening. You'll notice over here on the right. Let me make this bigger. So if you go over here to the right, you can see this is actually a link now, right? And this tap place JS link corresponds directly to the cloud editor. So I can be in a different file. I click this link, it'll actually navigate me to that line within my file. And you'll notice at the top, your address just changed to reflect that line ending. So if you're working on your team with your team members and you're like, hey, I want to check out this particular piece of code, you can actually copy and paste this into a message, send that to them, and then when they open it, it'll take them directly inside their, assuming they're part of your workspace, inside this project to that line. So this is all super useful for doing good work inside the cloud editor without the need to actually have to plug in your phone and and supercharge that wireless debugging process. Sort of in addition, we've got you'll notice in the gutter here, you've actually got this message, unexpected console statement. So this appears as a result of our new, it's called ESLint, but it's file formatting. So essentially, it's always tracking to see, whether or not you're making mistakes and sort of letting you know when that happens so that you don't have to kick off a cloud build before you realize that mistake. So it's sort of like an inline debugger. And it's super helpful, even if it's if you're doing things like it's useful for code formatting, right? So it's like to make it something more legible. So you'll see like if it doesn't align correctly, it's like looking for a particular way of having everything aligned so it's more readable. You can then either click this icon, right, and it'll fix it, or if I undo here, you can see I undid it. So I can actually go ahead, and there's a shortcut as well. So Option Shift F, and it will run that, and it'll fix it. So, so that's all super cool. Sort of in line with shortcuts, if you go into your project settings page and you go into the code editor, there's a new button here, and this will actually pull up all of the keyboard shortcuts for the cloud editor. Depending on what device you're currently on. So if you're on PC, it'll show you PC shortcuts. And then you'll see here, we actually have a new shortcut for something called Find File. So if we go back into the editor, and we either click this icon or we can do Command P. It'll show this go to file interface, and I can search for files, assets, whatever. And if I hit enter, it will take me directly into that part of my workspace. And then you can use this as an easy way of quickly switching between open tabs. It has the most recent files open here. So you don't actually have to use your mouse to navigate between files anymore. And of course, we've added a lot of these things, similar things to the drop-down menu. So if you want to hit Format File, that's available from the drop-down menu. If you want to view a diff inline, you can do that as well. And you can see here, this is the diff that's for my file inline. You'll also notice as sort of a quality of life thing here, we've got these new furl unfurl by default. It actually hides all of the code. It collapses it anywhere above and below each diff. So it's much easier to like quickly parse through the changes that you've made. And that's especially useful from the land view, where let's say you've changed like 15 different files. And these could be, 1,000-line files. So now it's really easy for you to hit land, review all of your changes quickly, and then publish from there. And speaking of publish, small thing, but now you'll be able to unpublish directly from the publish modal, and you'll have a sense of how recently you published to each staging or hosting environment. So you can now do all of this from the publish modal. Yeah, you may have noticed too, like README files can now be previewed. So whenever you clone a project, you'll be able to read this more easily and see all the media and everything. If you were sharing a project with a teammate and you wanted to include in your own README, you can uncheck that. You can edit this and then land those changes. You can even change day and night mode. So yeah, so that anyway, there's like a litany of other things in here, but those are sort of the higher level ones that I wanted to touch on, so that you can begin using these features immediately. I would also want to add that most of these features came from users who had told us about different pain points in the process, and so if there's anything that you find in your development experience that you'd like resolved, and including any kind of bugs you encounter, please, reach out to us on Slack, our feature request channel. We're always watching that one. So, yeah, I hope you enjoy all of these improvements and look forward to even more in the future. Thanks. Back to you, Tony.
Awesome. Thanks, Rigel. A lot of great updates to the Cloud Editor recently. So thanks for that. And let's jump into our next topic here. Let me share out my screen again. And what we're going to be talking about today is our connected domain feature. So I'm going to kind of do a split screen with slides on the left and some console screens on the right, and show you what this looks like here and kind of why you're going to do it. So first thing is, what is a connected domain? So when you're using the Cloud Editor, the Cloud Editor is great for creating, collaborating, and publishing your WebAR experiences. And when you publish your Cloud Editor created experience, it gets published to 8th Wall's global CDN. And all of your projects, they come with a default URL. It's an 8thwall.app URL. But oftentimes you might want to override that. Maybe you're working on a project for a client and they don't want to see 8thwall.app in their URL. They want to use their own domain. So this feature allows you to override the default hosted URL. You can use a custom domain or a subdomain. So you might pick like webar.mydomain.com. If, for example, www.mydomain.com, for example, is probably pointing to the main website, right? And this is a built-in feature, and it's really nice because it automates a lot of the complex steps under the covers of things like SSL certificate generation and CDN configurations. If you were self-hosting, you would have to do all of this manually, from setting up your web server to getting a custom SSL certificate to managing all the files and publishing that yourself. So this is just a really great way to take advantage of all of the built-in streamlined features from end to end to build and publish these experiences. But now you can also use your own domain with this. So it's kind of best of both worlds. A couple things to be mindful of as you set up a connected domain. And the first one is actually when you sign up. So when you first create your 8th Wall account, through that flow, I'm not going to go through this, but I'm going to show you some of these screenshots. It asks you for a workspace URL. So the workspace URL is more than just something that appears in the URL bar when you're editing your projects, but it also later gets used as the subdomain for your 8th Wall hosted projects. So for example, here, when I'm signing up, I put in my company, and you'll see in this project URL box down at the bottom, it's previewing this. It'll say mycompany.8thwall.app. So that's going to be your unique 8th Wall subdomain that all of your projects will be used by default. So this is not something that you can change later. So when you're setting this up, please choose wisely and go ahead and pick something like your company name or something that is appropriate for what you're going to be doing here. Now the second piece of this is the path, and that gets set when you actually create your project. So this is a screenshot of the new project screen. And again, you can kind of preview, it's going to give you a URL. It'll say this is going to live at my company name, or .8thwall.app, And then the value that you type into this box, this is the project name, but it also gets used as the path. So ultimately this would be, mycompanyname.atwall.app/project. Then you have a title, that's just a display name here. So put that all together, and basically, you've got your default project URL, which is your short name or your workspace name, as we sometimes call it, .athwall.app/project name. And you just get that by default whenever you publish your Cloud Editor project. And you can see, if you're ever unsure what that URL is, you can see this in a couple of different places. For example, you can see this on the project dashboard. So we will automatically show you what this is. Here's a sample project called live. This is the live learning workspace. So our short name is live. So we've got live.athwall.app/ and we call this project session 3. We automatically generate a short link, which will direct you to that URL. So if you end up connecting a domain later, you can still use that short link if you like and reroute it to your custom domain instead of the athwall.app. So that's one place you can see it. Also, as Rigel mentioned, there's that publish screen. And if I click the publish button, bring that up, you can also see what that default URL is. So again, I see live.athwall.app/session3. And then finally, you can see that on the project history page. So right now, this is a brand new project. We haven't landed any changes, but if you had an existing project and you've been making lots of changes, you would see the list of all your different commits, and you see these lines that point, and this maps which URL goes to which version of your code. So here I've got this public URL, which points to, right now, it's the only version of this project that I've got. And if I hover over at the bottom, I can also see the tooltip at the bottom of my browser that shows me what that URL is. So that's how you can access and see what the default URL. Now let's show you how you would actually set up a custom domain here. So you do that by going back to the project dashboard. Now, there are a few different moving parts that are involved in this. So these things happen asynchronously, and there's some time periods where it can take for things to verify and to validate and to get set up behind the scenes. So I'm not going to show you this live. We don't want to sit here and wait for some of these processes that might take minutes or so, but I'm going to show you all the different steps so you can do this when you want to connect your own custom domain. So the first thing you would do is you go to the project dashboard and you're going to click on setup domains. And in the setup domains section, this is where you can decide, do I want to set up a domain for an Athwall hosted project, or do I want to set up a domain if I'm self-hosting and not using the Cloud Editor? So it's one or the other. In a self-hosting config, you're basically whitelisting the domains where your project would live. But in this case, we're talking about a Cloud Editor Athwall hosted project, and that's where I go in here. So on this screen, we're going to enter in the domain that we want to connect. And this is basically, what do we want to have appear in the URL bar when people visit my WebAR experience? So let's just type in something. Let's call it live learning. And I have my own domain that we're just going to use for this. It's just tamarkio.cc. And that's step one. Now, if you want other domains to work as well, like maybe I want www.mydomain.com, and I want ar. You can add additional subdomains at the same time and connect them all, but anything you add in this add subdomain will get basically redirected to the one that you specify here. So I'm going to click connect, and we'll give this a minute. It's going to set things up here, and it's going to load status, and it's setting things up. And what's happening now is it's basically generating an SSL certificate. Let me switch. I'm not going to wait for this because it can take a few minutes. But after I add my domain or specify my subdomains, I click connect. And under the covers, again, it's creating the SSL certificate that's going to be used here. And one thing that you need to do is you need to specify, or you need to verify that you actually own that domain. So here's another project where I've kind of gotten to that next step here just for the sake of time. And in this case, I've connected webar.tamarkio.cc. And initially, you're not going to see this green check mark before it's verified, but you will see this step 2. And it'll tell you, like, here's the domain you're trying to connect, and here are the records that you need to add to your DNS server. So here's the host. And we made it easy. You can just copy it. And the type is a CNAME. CNAME also known as like an alias, or sometimes an A name, depending on your DNS provider. So this is the point where I would actually need to log into my domain registrar or my domain server, whether that's AWS Route 53 or GoDaddy or NameSecure, Namecheap. There are a ton of different DNS sites out there we can purchase and manage domains. So you would just log into your appropriate one. So for example, what I would do is I would go and copy this, then I would log in to my domain management. And here I've added this record that I pasted it in, and here is the value. So by putting this into my DNS server, the infrastructure is going to query and it's going to say, yep, you do actually own this domain. You're not trying to spoof somebody else's, because you have, here I've got control over my DNS server, and this is going to allow that SSL certificate to be generated. Now, once that is done, so you basically wait. So that process can take up to 24 hours. It usually takes much less time, usually a couple of minutes, maybe 5-10 minutes or so. And once that record has been verified, then you'll see that this green check mark will be displayed. So once we've verified that that you actually own your domain, well, then we automatically go and configure things within our infrastructure to set up the CDN and to configure it to point your custom domain at the eighth wall project that you're publishing. And again, that takes a few more minutes. So I'm going to switch to another tab that kind of shows where we're in that next step. So at that point, here's one of my colleagues' projects here. So the verification is finished. In this case, both a root domain and a subdomain. So in this case, it's toughbiz.com and a redirect from www. And it's telling me what records I would add here. And basically, these records are going to ultimately point you to a cloudfront.net URL. We use AWS under the covers for our infrastructure. So you're going to add these records, and that is what is actually pointing your custom domain at the unique URL for your eighth wall hosted experience. So if I go ahead and do that, we can take a look, and you can bring this up, and here I've got a custom URL. Now, going back to my example here, we can also see like webar.tomarkio.cc, which also has a eighthwall.app URL. But here I've got the same project that is accessible both at my custom domain. So here I've got a face effects project that I'm running here on my desktop, and I can get to the same experience if I also go to my live, in this case, live.eighthwall.app/connected-domain. So here, this project, again, can access it either way, but live.eighthwall.app/connected-domain, or in this case, now I've also connected webar.tomarkio.cc here. So again, we didn't wait for one particular project because it can take a little while for these things to verify and configurations to propagate, and especially with DNS. DNS records have time to live, which means things can be cached and they're not always updated globally instantly. So that's why one of the things I'm going to talk about next are some of the tips that you should definitely, tips and tricks that you should be thinking of as you set up your connected domain. So, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So the first thing is, don't wait until the last minute. I've seen a number of cases where somebody is launching, let's say we're launching an experience in, this morning in 20 minutes, we want this to go live, and we haven't connected our domain. Well, again, some of these things take time. The domain ownership validation can take up to 24 hours. Again, it's typically much less, but do these things in advance. Once you know what domain you want to use, connect it early. Make sure that's working, test it out. Do this all, before you actually need to launch. You're not in a crunch. Also, make sure you coordinate with your DNS administrator if that's not you. So depending on, your company, your organization, and roles and responsibilities and sizes, sometimes you might have been the person who bought the domain and has full access to the setup. Other times you might have to reach out to an IT department in order to add these records. And in that case, make sure you know who you need to coordinate with. Also, some of these activities are time sensitive. So that first step of domain ownership verification, that first CNAME record that we added, it needs to be added within 72 hours. After 72 hours, basically the certificate verification expires, and you have to do it again. So make sure you time these things and coordinate it right. Also, when in doubt, connect a subdomain. So for example, like www.mydomain.com or AR or, customername.mydomain.com. So you put a subdomain in front. And the reason why I mention this is because not all DNS providers are equal. Some DNS providers actually don't support setting up aliases for a root domain. Others do. And depending on your setup, you can always reach out and ask us, and there oftentimes can be some workarounds. But that's one thing that you do want to be mindful of, is check with your DNS registrar and see if they support CNAMEs, or they might call it an A name or an alias record or a CNAME for root domains. See if they support that. And if they don't, then you might want to purchase your domain at a different registrar. Also, another tip, make sure that the domain or the subdomain that you're using is not already in use. For example, www.mydomain.com. It can't point to both, my e-commerce website as well as my WebAR experience. That subdomain is already pointing elsewhere. So make sure you're using a new domain, a new subdomain, and then also whatever domain or subdomain you're going to be using, make sure you clean out any old DNS records before you start. So my example, when I connect webar.tamarkio.cc, make sure there isn't already a DNS record for WebAR pointing somewhere else, because if it's there, some of the checks that happen under covers are going to tell you, that's already in use. We can't do that, and you're going to have to clean things up after the fact. So by kind of being mindful of some of these things, you can really make this process smoother for you. Also, if you're going to connect multiple subdomains, you're going to do it all at the same time. So if I want ar.mydomain.com and ar2.mydomain.com and ar3.mydomain.com, and I want to point those all at the same project, make sure you specify those all at the same time. You can't just piecemeal add subdomains after the fact. You'd have to delete the connected domain and reconfigure it with all of the desired subdomains all at once. Now, the other final tip here is, how do you know that? How can you check if the DNS setup is working as expected? So there's a really handy command line utility called dig. Let me bring that up and show you here. So for example, if I want to just make sure that my DNS server is actually doing the right thing, first of all, there was that verification record that we added. And you can run the dig command. And when I run this command, it's going to go back and you're going to want to look for the answer section. So here I'm seeing what it's expected, right? I've got my verification record, type is CNAME, and it's pointing to the validation URL that was displayed in the 8th wall console in that step 2. So basically, this is a different project, but basically you want to make sure that what you see here and here matches up what you see there. Of course, it's a different project, so ignore these specific values. And then secondly, once we can also verify the record for the domain itself. So in this case, I connected webar.tamarkio.cc. And if I scroll up here to the answer section, I can see, yep, I've got my A name or my CNAME here set up. It's pointing to the cloudfront.net host that we've been provided. Again, different project here, so these values aren't going to match, but it should match for your specific project. And you can verify that all these things are set up. And once things have been connected and verified, you will see these green check marks appear next to the different record, meaning that our system has actually queried, verified that, yep, those things are in place and you should be good to go. If you don't see the green check marks, again, the first thing you probably want to do is pull up your command line and look at, use the dig command. And, for example, go in here and I can say, let's pretend I didn't have a check mark for this one. I can copy that value, do a dig and paste. And I'm just going to do toughbiz.com. And great, yep, I've got this answer and it matches what I see over here on the right, this _99AE. Yep, that all looks good. And maybe verify, let's clear this. And we'll do a dig on www.toughbiz.com. And great, so this all matches up. So last tip again, use the dig utility. It's definitely going to be your friend when you want to query and see what's going on under the covers with DNS servers. Don't be alarmed if when you add the configuration, if you run a dig command and you don't see the answer section, you don't see it just yet. Again, things with DNS need to kind of propagate across the internet. It's not always an instantaneous change. Also, you'll see things like this value 360. These are time to lives. So that means that record potentially could be cached across the internet for that amount of time. So when you're creating and setting up your DNS, you might want to set a time to live. In this case, my particular DNS provider, the minimum time to live I can set is 4 hours. So if I make a mistake here and I put in the wrong value, that potentially could be cached for up to 4 hours across the internet. So just be careful what you copy and paste. You can set time to lives lower and things like that. So with that, we've kind of covered the connected domain topics that I want to go through here today. At this point, why don't we just open things up for Q&A? Let me stop sharing for right now. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions. And of course, the questions here today, they don't have to be related specifically to the topic of today's session, which is connected domains. Feel free to ask questions about just any eighth wall related topic in general. So let's see, first question. Can you elaborate more about root domains and some of the gotchas there? So yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned before, some DNS providers don't let you create, they'll either call it a CNAME, or they might call it an alias record or an ANAME record. They might not let you create that for the root domain. When I say root domain, I mean like mydomain.com without the www or without a subdomain prefix in front of it. So, if that's the case, you've got a couple of options. You could either transfer your domain to a different registrar that does support root domain aliases or CNAME for root domains. Some registrars provide forwarding features, in which case you would you connect www.mydomain.com. So you would connect the subdomain to eighth wall, and then at the registrar site you might do a domain forward that forwards the root domain to the subdomain. So just be careful when you do that, that you do it properly. Do like 302 temporary redirects, don't use 301 permanent redirects, and make sure you don't get any kind of loops and things like that. So just be careful with that. Great question. Let's see here. Another question. So I guess for Rigel, this is just an image target related question. So the next question here is about, I wanna use an image target, but I don't want my content to be positioned exactly on top of the image target. Is there a way that you can adjust things so that it's offset, basically, is what the question is asking?
Totally. So we have a number of different components and primitives that make this particularly easy. So if you're using like a curved image target, for instance, as an example, there's one called extras. I think it's named image target. And you have a tag essentially, and then anything you put inside of that will be a child of that parent. So you're tracking the parent the whole time, and then all of the children can be positioned independently, sort of using the parent as its offset position. So you can go and and by the way, this works not just for image targets, but for face effects and any other thing like that, where you have something you want to track, and then you have your object that you want to position at a certain point, and then you just apply a position to it. If you've ever used, Unity and you have child objects or child game objects, very similar sort of thing in regards to offsetting, rotation, position, scale, all of those things.
Great, great. Well, if anybody has additional questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A. Let's take a look. Let's see here. Is there a way for users to reset their phone options if somehow they choose not allow access to the camera upon launching a QR code? Okay. So great question. So this is kind of going to be browser dependent, but our XR Extras library is checking for these types of things. So if you get into a state where somebody has canceled the camera permissions pop up, then generally you're gonna see is a message that says you need to reload the page for AR. So when you get into situations where maybe the browser doesn't have camera access or somebody's denied permissions, the XR Extras library generally will show you what needs to be done to fix it. Now, like on iOS, for example, if you dismiss camera and reload the page, it'll ask you again. If you dismiss, I believe, the motion and orientation sensor and reload the page, it's not going to ask you again. But we will see that that's turned off. And in that case, you have to like quit Safari and reopen it so that it will ask you again. So there are some different browser nuances, but for the most part, the XR Extras library is going to, show you or tell the user what they need to do in order to get that. Now, it's not always possible to like have it automatically, retry, right? They might have to reload the page or restart their browser, but we will tell them, the XR Extras library will tell them what needs to happen in those situations. I don't know, Rigel, anything else you want to add? Oh, great.
Yeah. So I could screen share, but this is faster. So this is a website. Sorry for the exposure. This is a website that I just denied camera permissions for, and you can't. It's hard to tell, but I'm in Safari. So if I hit this reload button, right, because we know that Safari is going to reprompt you every time you reload the page, whereas like Chrome on Android won't. If I hit allow, it'll work, right? But if I go back and I deny it, it'll just keep asking me to reload the page. But because this particular app I just opened doesn't require motion permissions, it never asked me for that. So in short, we have if you go into XR Extras and you're curious, you can actually view all of the ways that we're doing all this routing on our GitHub. And you can, of course, because it's open source, if there's anything that you want to add to it or modifications you want to make because of a particular edge case, or maybe it's a browser within an app that it's launching in a foreign country, and it may be difficult to catch or test. Like let us know about this stuff, because we're always looking to improve the routing flows.
Yeah, and absolutely, and this is another reason where it's always good if you're using XR Extras, if and where possible, you do want to pull it from our CDN, which is the way that all the projects are set up by default, because if we encounter a new situation or we discover something new, we can make an update, and then literally the next time that experience reloads the page, you can get these fixes and these updates, as opposed to if you've downloaded all the XR Extra source code and like built your own version, and then we release an update, well, your project is still going to use the copy of the code that you've embedded, so you won't automatically get these updates. So when possible, pull from CDN. We're over time, we've been making it easier and easier to customize XR Extras without actually having to grab all the code and customize it. For example, the loading screen, we now have a bunch of parameters that you can set if you want to change like background colors or the image on the load screen and things like that. And if you find other situations where, oh, I wish I could customize this a little bit easier, please do let us know, and we can take that feedback and hopefully incorporate that into a subsequent update for the XR Extras library. We're always adding new functionality.
Totally.
Great. If there are any final questions, please do add them into the Q&A. Let me just share out the final screen here really quick. And again, play from current slide. Here we go. So, again, if any final questions, please do let us know. I want to thank everybody for their time and interest here today and joining yet another 8th Wall live learning session. You can reach us on our developer Slack. If you haven't joined, please do so. Just simply sign up at 8thwall.com/Slack, and great place to ask questions, to share feedback, to just interact with the developer community in general. And with that, we will sign off for today's session, and we'll see you on a future live learning webinar. Thanks everyone for your time.
Cool. Thank you, everybody.